He finally told his mother the truth. He is unhappy. He cannot keep pretending, and part of him believes he needs the person he walked away from. You. But what exactly did he confess? What did his mother say that stopped him cold? And now that the truth is finally out, what will he do next? He admitted the distance did not bring peace. He admitted the silence became heavier than the conversation he was avoiding. And then he said the one thing he had been afraid to say aloud. I still think about them. For some of you, this may be confirmation that the real battle was never a lack of feeling. It was imbalance. It was fear pulling one way and desire pulling the other. That is where the reversed Temperance card becomes a powerful psychological symbol for this part of the story. Not as fortune-telling, but as a mirror of inner conflict. Temperance upright represents harmony, patience, and emotional balance. Reversed, it can reflect a person who has lost that balance. Someone trying to appear calm while everything inside feels divided. He may have been sitting quietly after speaking to his mother, staring at the floor, replaying the words he had just released. Your name was no longer trapped inside his thoughts. It had entered the room. It had become real, and that changed something. Ezekiel 36:26 says, "A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you." This verse speaks of inward transformation, not pressure, not manipulation. A heart being softened where resistance once lived. Proverbs 25 says, "Counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." His mother may have become the person who drew out what he had buried. Now pay attention to this. His silence did not prove he was at peace. It may have concealed a private struggle. One moment he convinced himself that leaving was necessary. The next, he was looking at old messages, remembering your voice, and comparing his present unhappiness with the peace he once felt around you. He is tired of performing, tired of resisting, tired of carrying the contradiction alone. But the conversation did not end with his confession. His mother asked him one question, simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. And that question may be the reason he is now considering whether he should finally reach out. She looked at him and asked, "If being without this person has made you so unhappy, what are you still protecting by staying away?" He did not answer immediately. His breathing may have slowed. His eyes may have moved toward the floor, because looking at her would have meant facing the truth already forming inside him. What was he protecting? Not his peace. He had already admitted he did not have peace. Not his freedom. The distance had not made him feel free. It had only given him more room to think about everything he refused to confront. He may have tried to say that too much had happened, that the timing was complicated, that reaching out now could create more confusion. But every explanation sounded weaker once it entered the room. His mother was not demanding that he return to you. She was not telling him to ignore the past or pretend that one conversation could repair everything. She was asking him to examine the real motive beneath his silence. And that is where the Seven of Pentacles becomes a meaningful psychological symbol. This card reflects a moment of evaluation. Someone looking at what they invested, what has grown, and what may have been abandoned before it had the chance to mature. It can represent the uncomfortable pause where a person must ask whether their patience was wisdom or whether waiting became another form of avoidance. For some of you, he may now be looking back at the connection and realizing that he expected immediate certainty from something that required patience, honesty, and consistent care. He wanted to know the outcome before taking the emotional risk. He wanted reassurance before becoming vulnerable. And when he could not control what the relationship might require from him, he stepped away and called it protection. Now pay attention. Pride does not always look loud. Sometimes pride looks like refusing to admit that a decision hurt you. Sometimes it looks like maintaining distance because returning would require you to say, "I was wrong." Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall." This is not only about arrogance. It may also speak to the danger of holding tightly to an image while something valuable is being lost. He may have realized that he was protecting the version of himself who claimed he did not need you. The version who insisted leaving was necessary. The version who feared that reaching out would make him appear weak, uncertain, or inconsistent. But his mother did not let him hide behind that version of himself. She gave him a moment to sit with the silence. Then she asked another question. Did you leave because the connection was wrong, or because it required you to become someone you were afraid to become? The question may have unsettled him because it forced him to separate two very different things. Leaving because a connection is harmful is one thing. Leaving because a connection exposes the places where you still need to grow is another. He may have begun replaying the moments he once described as pressure. The conversations where you asked him to be clear. The moments when you needed consistency instead of mixed signals. The times you asked him to take responsibility for what he said, what he promised, and how his absence affected you. You were not necessarily asking him to be perfect. You may have been asking him to be present. And for someone accustomed to hiding behind distance, emotional presence can feel more threatening than conflict. Now pay attention to this. A person may deeply desire intimacy while still fearing what intimacy reveals. They may want to be loved, but become uncomfortable when love sees beyond the image they have learned to present. Being fully known can expose insecurity. It can reveal inconsistency. It can bring unhealed wounds close enough that they can no longer be ignored. What he called pressure may have been the discomfort of realizing that you could see where his words and actions did not match. That is where the reversed star becomes a meaningful psychological symbol for this part of the story. Not as fortune-telling, and not as proof of what another person is privately thinking. The star upright can represent hope, openness, healing, and the courage to believe that something good is possible. Reversed, it may reflect discouragement, self-doubt, or a person who has lost faith in their ability to sustain what they desire. He may not have doubted the connection as much as he doubted himself inside the connection. For some of you, this is the distinction that changes everything. He did not necessarily withdraw because he felt nothing. He may have withdrawn because feeling something placed a responsibility in front of him. It asked him to communicate when silence was easier, to remain consistent when disappearing had become familiar, to receive love without searching for the moment it would be taken away. 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear." This does not mean fear never appears. It means fear should not be allowed to govern every decision love asks a person to make. His mother may have watched his expression change as the truth settled in. Then she asked him to stop speaking generally. She asked him to name the exact moment he decided to leave. And the memory that came to him was not a moment when the connection felt wrong. It was the moment he realized how deeply he needed you. The moment may have been quieter than his mother expected. Not an argument, not a betrayal, not a dramatic ending. It may have been a conversation where you saw past the answer he usually gave and asked what he was really carrying. Perhaps you noticed the fear beneath his distance. Perhaps instead of criticizing him, you responded with patience, and that kindness may have frightened him more than anger would have, because anger would have given him something to resist. Compassion gave him nowhere to hide. For one brief moment, he may have felt safe enough to imagine that this could become permanent, that you might truly know him, not only the confident parts, but the uncertain ones. Not only the promises, but the places where he still struggled to follow through. That was when the future stopped feeling hypothetical, and the possibility of being loved became connected to the responsibility of staying. He may have thought about everything that could go wrong. What if he disappointed you? What if he repeated the patterns he witnessed growing up? What if he accepted your love, built something real, and then failed to protect it? So outwardly, he may have said, "I need space. This is moving too fast. I am not ready." But inwardly, the truth may have sounded very different. I do not know how to receive this without ruining it. Now pay attention to this. That is where the reverse Two of Swords becomes a powerful psychological symbol. Not as fortune-telling, and not as proof of anyone's hidden thoughts. Upright, the Two of Swords can represent indecision, emotional protection, and the attempt to avoid a difficult truth. Reversed, it may reflect a decision that can no longer be delayed. The defenses are weakening. What was once buried is beginning to demand acknowledgement. He may have believed that leaving allowed him to escape the choice, but distance did not remove the decision. It only postponed the moment when he would have to face what he truly wanted. For some of you, what appeared to be certainty may have been someone overwhelmed by two opposing fears: the fear of losing you and the fear of being fully chosen by you. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind." This does not mean fear never appears. It means fear was never meant to make every important decision. His mother may have understood something he had not yet admitted. He was not only afraid that you might leave, he was afraid you might truly choose him, and then he would have to prove that he knew how to stay. His mother may have looked at him carefully before saying what he was not expecting to hear. Missing you did not automatically mean he was ready for you. Being unhappy without you did not prove that he had changed. And wanting the comfort he once felt in your presence was not the same as becoming capable of protecting your heart. That truth may have unsettled him because it removed the fantasy that emotion alone could repair what avoidance had damaged. He could miss you deeply and still repeat the same pattern. He could think about you every night and still remain unwilling to communicate clearly. He could call you his kingdom spouse and still be unprepared for the honesty, consistency, and responsibility that kind of partnership would require. So his mother may have asked him, "What has actually changed in you besides the pain of losing them?" And the room may have become quiet again, because pain can wake a person up, but pain by itself does not always transform them. Now pay attention to this. That is where the Justice card becomes a powerful psychological symbol for this part of the story, not as fortune-telling, but as a mirror of accountability. Justice can represent truth, consequences, balance, and the moment when feelings must be measured against actions. It asks a person to stop focusing only on what they want and consider what their choices have cost someone else. For some of you, this is important. Being someone's kingdom spouse does not mean accepting confusion without limits. It does not mean excusing repeated abandonment, manipulation, or silence, because the connection feels spiritually significant. A connection that carries real purpose should produce truth. It should produce maturity. It should produce courage and respectful action. Not only longing, not only intensity, not only words spoken after the consequences become painful. James 2:17 says, "Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone." This verse may reflect the difference between believing something matters and living in a way that proves it matters. His mother was not trying to shame him. She may have been asking whether he wanted you back because he was lonely, or whether he was finally prepared to approach you with humility. There is a difference between missing the way someone made you feel and being ready to honor the way they deserve to feel around you. Safe, respected, considered, chosen through consistent action. Then she asked him one more question. "If you contacted them tonight, what would you actually say?" He may have opened his mouth and almost answered, "I miss you." But the words stopped there. because suddenly, he understood that missing you was not the apology. It was only the reason he could no longer avoid giving one. He may have tried to begin with the easiest part. I should not have disappeared. The words may have sounded small compared with everything his silence created. So he tried again. I withdrew instead of telling the truth. I left you to make sense of something I was too afraid to explain. His mother may have remained quiet, allowing him to hear the weight of his own admission. Because when someone leaves without clarity, the silence does not stay empty. The other person fills it with questions. Was any of it real? Did I ask for too much? Was I wrong to trust what I felt? For some of you, this may be the part he is finally beginning to understand. His avoidance did not only protect him from an uncomfortable conversation, it may have forced you to carry the confusion he refused to face. He may have lowered his voice and admitted something even harder. I made them doubt the connection because I was the one doubting whether I could handle it. Then the explanations may have started. He was overwhelmed. He had too much happening. He did not know how to communicate what he felt, and some of those things may have been true. But his mother may have interrupted gently. That explains why you struggled. It does not erase what your struggle did to them. Now pay attention to this. That is where the Page of Wands becomes a meaningful psychological symbol, not as fortune-telling, but as a mirror of the first honest step. The Page of Wands can represent a message, a new direction, or the courage to act on something that has been stirring inside. But it can also reflect immaturity when enthusiasm moves faster than responsibility. He may feel a sudden urge to contact you, but a sincere apology cannot be only an emotional impulse. It must name the harm. It must accept that forgiveness may not restore the access he once had. And it must not pressure you to respond simply because he has finally found the courage to speak. Psalm 51:10 says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." This is not only a request to feel better. It is a request to become different inwardly. For some of you, you are not required to lower your boundaries because someone finally recognizes what they lost. You are allowed to listen carefully, to move slowly, to watch whether the apology is followed by consistency. He may have been ready to reach for his phone when his mother stopped him with one final question. Is fear the only reason you stayed away? Then she looked at him more closely. Or was there someone else's opinion, a family expectation, or a choice you made that you are still too ashamed to admit influenced you? He may have hesitated before answering, because the truth was not that one person controlled his decision. It may have been more subtle than that. A comment about timing, a warning about becoming distracted, a friend telling him to focus on himself, a belief that he needed more money, more stability, or a clearer plan before he could offer anyone a serious commitment. None of those concerns were completely unreasonable, but he may have chosen the voices that supported the decision fear had already made. That is the part his mother may have recognized. Sometimes people seek counsel because they genuinely want wisdom. Other times, they keep asking until someone gives them permission to avoid what they already know requires courage. He may have told himself he was being practical, that he needed to establish himself first, that love could wait until everything else was in order. But beneath those respectable explanations may have been a quieter fear. What if the people around him did not understand the connection? What if choosing you required him to disappoint expectations he had spent years trying to meet? Now pay attention to this. That is where the Six of Cups becomes a meaningful psychological symbol, not as fortune-telling, and not as proof of anyone's private decisions. The Six of Cups can reflect familiarity, emotional memory, and the influence of the past on present choices. It may represent old beliefs about love, family, security, and what a relationship is supposed to look like. For some of you, He may have been trying to build his future according to rules he learned long before he met you. Choose what looks safe. Choose what others will understand. Do not risk too much. Do not need anyone too deeply. But the past can offer guidance without being allowed to control every new decision. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors there is safety." Counsel matters. But counsel cannot replace personal honesty. Advice becomes dangerous when it is used to silence conviction instead of examine it. His mother may have reminded him that outside pressure could explain part of his confusion. It could not remove his responsibility. He chose which voices to follow. He chose silence over clarity. He chose what looked practical over the conversation that might have revealed what was true. Then she asked him the most dangerous question yet. If no one else's approval mattered, if there were no expectations to satisfy and no image to protect, whom would you choose? This time, he did not need several minutes. He did not look away. The answer came almost immediately. You already know. His mother may not have needed him to say your name. She heard it in the silence. She saw it in the way his expression changed when the answer left his mouth. You already know, and for the first time, he may have stopped speaking about you as someone from his past. He may have begun speaking about you as the person he once imagined building with. Not someone meant to rescue him from his unhappiness. Not someone responsible for completing what he refused to heal within himself. Not someone expected to carry his purpose, his faith, or the weight of his emotional growth. When he said he needed his kingdom spouse, the deeper truth may have been this: I need to stop running from the kind of partnership I once prayed for. A partnership that called him toward honesty, toward responsibility, toward peace that did not require pretending. You may have been one of the few people who could challenge him without making him feel diminished. Someone whose presence reminded him that mature love is not only comfort, it is accountability offered with care. Now pay attention to this. That is where the reversed Queen of Swords becomes a meaningful psychological symbol, not as fortune-telling, and not as proof that a specific outcome is guaranteed. Upright, the Queen of Swords can represent clarity, discernment, direct communication, and emotional wisdom. Reversed, she may reflect what happens when truth has been avoided for too long. Communication becomes strained. Silence hardens into distance. Pain may begin speaking where honesty should have spoken first. For some of you, he may now realize that your boundaries were not cruelty. Your questions were not attacks. Your need for clarity was not an attempt to control him. You may simply have reached the point where protecting your peace required you to stop accepting uncertainty. Ecclesiastes 4:9 says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor." Partnership is not one person saving another. It is two people willing to carry responsibility, speak truth, and build with mutual effort. His realization may be sincere, but it does not erase what happened. It does not guarantee that you will return, and it does not require you to forget the silence simply because he has finally found words. Still, something in him may have shifted. He reached for his phone. He opened the conversation he had avoided for so long and began typing. But before he could finish the first sentence, his eyes fell on the last message you sent. And whatever courage he had gathered suddenly had to face the truth you had already spoken. The message may have been shorter than he remembered. "I care about you, but I cannot keep living inside uncertainty. I need honesty and I need peace." At the time, he may have read those words as rejection, as pressure, as proof that you were closing the door before he felt ready to make a decision. But now, sitting beside his mother, he may have seen something different. You were not trying to punish him. You were exhausted. You may have reached the point where caring about him could no longer mean abandoning yourself. And what he once called finality may have been a boundary formed after too many unanswered questions. For some of you, this is where his understanding begins to change. Your last message may not have been asking him to chase you. It may have been asking him to stop expecting access without clarity, to stop offering fragments and calling them connection, to stop leaving you responsible for interpreting a silence he chose. Now pay attention to this. That is where the reversed Five of Cups becomes a powerful psychological symbol for this part of the story. Not as fortune-telling, and not as a promise that reconciliation will happen. Upright. The Five of Cups can represent grief, regret, and attention fixed on what has already been lost. Reversed, it may reflect the moment when someone begins turning back toward the truth, accepting what happened, and considering whether healing is still possible. He may finally be realizing that regret cannot remain centered only on his own pain. It is not enough for him to mourn the connection, because the distance has become unbearable. He must also recognize what his silence may have cost you. His mother may have looked at the phone and said, "You can reach out, but you cannot decide how they receive it. You may answer cautiously. You may remain silent. You may tell him that too much has happened. And if his apology is sincere, he must respect every one of those possibilities. Because courage is not only pressing send. Courage is telling the truth without trying to control what that truth earns you." Ephesians 4:15 speaks of speaking the truth in love. That kind of truth does not manipulate. It does not demand immediate forgiveness. It speaks honestly while honoring the other person's freedom to choose. He looked at the message he had typed. "I miss you. Can we talk?" But now it sounded incomplete. It centered his loneliness, his urgency, his need for relief. So he deleted it. Then he began again. This time, he acknowledged that he withdrew instead of communicating. He admitted that his silence may have caused pain and confusion. He made it clear that you did not owe him a response. Then he added the sentence he had been avoiding. "I understand if I no longer have the right to ask, but I would be grateful for the chance to tell you the truth." His thumb hovered over the screen. The message was ready, but he had not pressed send yet. His thumb may have remained there for one more second. Then he pressed send. No dramatic promise followed. No immediate reply appeared. Only the quiet realization that, for once, he had chosen honesty instead of escape. The message did not ask you to rescue him from his unhappiness. It did not pretend that one apology could remove the weight of the silence. He took responsibility for withdrawing. He admitted that the distance did not bring peace. And he acknowledged that you may no longer want the conversation he was finally ready to have. Still, he asked whether, at some point, you might be open to hearing the truth. Then he placed the phone down, because the next part was no longer his to control. Now pay attention to this. That is where the reversed Nine of Pentacles becomes a meaningful psychological symbol for this final part of the story. Not as fortune-telling, and not as proof that a reunion is guaranteed. Upright, the Nine of Pentacles can represent independence, stability, self-respect, and a life built with patience. Reversed, it may reflect insecurity beneath outward confidence, or the realization that appearing self-sufficient is not the same as feeling whole within yourself. He may have spent a long time trying to prove that he did not need anyone, that he could move forward alone. That choosing distance made him stronger, but independence becomes avoidance when it is used to hide the fear of healthy partnership. For some of you, his message may be the first visible sign that he is no longer pretending the separation gave him what he wanted. But it is only a first sign. Sending the truth is not the same as becoming consistent enough to live by it. His mother may have reminded him of that before the conversation ended. If you mean what you wrote, your actions must be able to support it. Not for one night. Not only while he is afraid of losing you, but through patience, accountability, and respect for whatever answer you choose to give. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." Waiting does not mean placing your life on hold for someone else's decision. It means continuing in faith while your own strength, purpose, and direction are renewed. Your life does not have to remain suspended while he learns how to stay. Your healing continues. Your peace continues. Your relationship with God continues. And whether he receives an answer tonight, later, or not at all, the truth has already entered the room. He misses you. He recognizes what he avoided. But the real confirmation will not be the message he sent. It will be whether his next actions finally become consistent with the truth he told his mother.